Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and I'm out here on a snowy day to talk about the American Visionary Art Museum behind me. Well, I would like to start with a confession, but before that I'd like to start with a quick thank you to my colleague Molly Ricks. If you're just tuning in, Molly is the second half of Baltimore Heritage's two-person staff, and I think over the last 11 months that we've been doing these videos, she has become the preeminent archival photo researcher and Ken Burns style video producer, certainly here in Baltimore, maybe even across the country. So two quick things. One, thank you, Molly. And two is you better not edit this part out. All right, back to my confession on the American Visionary Art Museum. I have been coming here for years and have been totally ignorant to the fact that, that this building is a 1913 historic paint company building. When the doors opened in 1995, they had converted this 1913 building from the Baltimore Copper Paint Company into the world's largest museum dedicated to self-trained or outsider art. But before we get to the museum, let's go back to 1913 and talk about the paint company. The Baltimore Copper Paint Company was founded in 1870 by a gentleman named Oliver Reeder. And Baltimore at that point was a hub of paint manufacturer. We had companies, and I'll read them off, like Budicke Paints, 1868, and then eventually Bruning and Hanlon and Hirschberg and Athey and Davis. We had a large manufacturing base, so it made sense for the Copper Paint Company to open an office here. And after all, beginning even in the 1840s, we had become the hub of chromium manufacture. A young gentleman named Isaac Tyson had discovered chromium in the fields of Bear Hills in Baltimore County and Soldier's Delight in Harford County. And this was at a time when chromium, people were just discovering you could add chromium to paint, and your drab, off-white living room walls could be a sparkling yellow or green or blue, really adding some color literally to your house. And Tyson did quite well by that. His company, the Baltimore Chrome Works, became the largest chromium supplier in the world. We may not know that name today, but we probably do know the name that his company became, which is Allied Signal. And it's on that former plant site right on the Baltimore Harbor, now part of Harbor East, where Exelon and some other companies have their fantastic offices. So 1913, the paint company opens its offices here, and it made sense for them to be in Baltimore, but also on the water. They had discovered that if you add copper to paint, and then you put that paint on the bottom of boats in the salty Chesapeake Bay, it kept barnacles from growing on them. So there were many a ship's captain who had boats in the bay or out in the salty Atlantic that were very thankful for the Baltimore Copper Paint Company. And I suspect many of you out there who have had boats on the salty Chesapeake Bay are smiling right now, also thankful for the Baltimore Copper Paint Company and its advances. Other paint manufacturing hubs like Cleveland, they are also on a body of water, Lake Erie, but that's freshwater where barnacles don't really grow. So it kind of made sense that a barnacle prohibitive paint was going to be invented and produced here in Baltimore. When the company opened in 1913, exactly 1 year later, an enormous bolt of lightning came down and demolished half of the building. Where this giant whirligig is behind me, that used to be the other half of the building, the company never rebuilt it. And incidentally, don't worry, the whirligig has a pretty thick steel cable running down into the ground so that if a second bolt of lightning happens to strike here again, I think we'll be covered with this whirly, fantastic shimmering lightning rod. But even though the paint company never built the second part of the building back, it did quite well. Its paint, the Baltimore Copper Paint, was on the bottom of all of the Liberty ships coming out of Fairfield Shipyard in World War II. And its paint was on the bottom of all of the America's Cup racers, at least here on the American side, up until they started being made of fiberglass. And I guess they had to change paints then. So the company stayed in the Reeder family for about 100 years, but by the 1960s, it had been bought out. And when Rebecca Hoffberger, the founder of the American Visionary Art Museum, was looking for a space in the late 80s and 90s, this building was available. It was available at least in part because although it had a great site right on the water, it also had an enormous tank of petrochemical products underneath it that had to be cleaned out. And undaunted, Ms. Hoffberger did that, I think with some giant pumps. and we have the building today. Miss Hoffberger had got her sort of start in her belief that self-trained artists could be powerful by working out of the psychiatric department at Sinai Hospital with a program called People Helping People. I think there may have been one other place in the world where the self-trained art was starting to take off. I think it was in France, Paris maybe, but she had a really big visions for it. And when this building opened up again, it became the world's largest, and still is the world's largest, museum dedicated to self-trained artists, or art brut, as the French would say. The first artist through the door in 1995 on Thanksgiving weekend was a gentleman named, let me make sure I get his name right, named Gerald Hawkes, who is an artist who works in matchsticks. And if you've been inside and seen his exhibit, which still is one of the main galleries, it is literally awe-inspiring what he is able to make out of matchsticks. The second artist through the door was a gentleman, a farmer and artist named Vollis Simpson, who made, among other things, the giant whirligig behind me. So pretty neat there as well. Along the way, Miss Hoffberger was able to raise enough money to build the museum and raise some friends, including Senator Barbara Mikulski, who in 1993, before the building even opened, had Congress officially declare that the museum, and let me read this, that the museum is the National Museum, Education Center, and Repository for Intuitive Self-Taught Artistry. So that title, I think it carries today, the National Museum for Self-Taught Artists. So that was 1995. By 1999, the museum had brought the Kinetic Sculpture Race to the East Coast. If you don't know the Kinetic Sculpture Race, it is wonderful, bizarre vehicles made by people like you and me that enter into a race. They've got to navigate Baltimore streets. They have to be self-propelled. They've got to navigate Baltimore streets. They have to cross the harbor, so they have to float. And they've got to make it through a giant mud pit and back. And I think the winner is the team that comes in dead middle. So right in the middle, you win the race. Obviously a race more for fun than anything. That was 1999. By 2004, by 2000, the museum had started the largest art program for incarcerated kids and kids at risk. And those are the folks who made the wonderful mosaic, the literally sparkling mosaic on the outside of this 1913 paint company building. By 2004, the gift shop had opened called the Sideshow, a gentleman named Ted Frankel. And I believe, at least as far as I know, it is the only gift shop, museum gift shop, where whoopee cushions are the least eyebrow-raising items that you can purchase. And also by 2004, the museum had opened its second building here just across the courtyard in the former Four Roses Whiskey Warehouse. So literally where barrels of blended whiskey were stored and being aged to ship across the country. Now there was more self-trained artist and artwork exhibits, including the fabulously whimsical bird's nest that is the second floor balcony coming out of the old warehouse building. So I'm going to wrap up and say, if you have been here before, or if you haven't, I would encourage you to come and be bedazzled as I was. The museum is open. I think you have to make an appointment ahead of time, but check out their website. And if you're not comfortable with that, even coming and taking a walk around the outside, looking at the mosaic and the whirligig and the bird's nest and some other really wonderful art is more than worth it for a half hour or so on a snowy or even a non-snowy day. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.